Today I shall tell you a story. Episode 5 of No Choice But to Remember It. The Weather. Linda Rose's Diary. It had all started when I met Wiley Ashton. We hit it off pretty good, and we were at a bar and we talked together. And that led to us sharing phone numbers, and surprisingly, we actually talked more and more. He's a fisherman, owns a boat and all that, pretty persistent as well. He's texted me before he's gone out to sea and it's been pouring, but he always does come back safe. As we talked more and more, things happened, so we started to stay together. I had moved out of my parents' house about 20 years ago. First when I went out for college, and then I got a house, but me and Wiley knew each other for about a year, so we moved in to help cut costs and all that. I would have asked Jamie, of course. I knew him longer anyways, but he moved out a bit ago. Got a job as a writer at a library or something like that, I think. Not too sure. But it was good when we first lived together. I had a bit of a crush back then, and more we got used to it, the more and more it just became normal life. My crush stopped, and it was just us together as roommates. It would go pretty normally. We'd wake up, watch TV, and eat a breakfast. We'd switched up who made it every morning. We'd go to work. I worked in money management, and he, as I said before, was a fisherman. I'd work and eat whatever small lunch I'd make or buy. He'd work and do the same. He didn't have a big crew or anything. He had a friend who owned a fish shop, and he and 3 other people worked for the friend and would get and sell fish to him. I've been to that shop a couple times. Not to get anything, no, that wasn't needed, but just because of small occasions where I wanted to see what the friend is like. The store is very well organized, although no one could cover that horrid smell. It was put into sections, different types of raw fish. They even went as far to have some pre-cooked fish, or boneless raw fish for those who didn't know how to prepare anything. Wiley was not one of those people. That man could cook anything you give to him and do it properly. Doesn't matter if it's meat or not, but he was especially good at making fish. I'm not the best cook. I'd make a small breakfast on the day it was my turn, and I could do it well, but Wiley, that man, could cook. Not once have I ever gotten like salmonella or any type of food poisoning from him. We would go home, and for dinner, Wiley would make his greatest catch. He had a thing going. Wiley would get the fish and then sell all of his fish, but he was allowed to keep one, and he always kept the one that he liked the most. Whether it was because cod tasted good or because that was the biggest sea bass he'd ever seen, he'd always pick and make that. It's funny, with having a fisherman as a roommate, I would have thought I'd have more than just one meal with fish in it. And the greatest catch changed so much that variety was never a problem. Although sometimes, if we hadn't finished a fish from the night before, he'd make that in the morning or something like that. I never felt like I was bored of fish. It almost became a game. He'd make his greatest catch, bring it home, and I'd guess what fish it was. After a while, I could tell because there was only so many types of fish in that area that was safe for eating. So even though it changed almost every day, I could still tell which fish it was. Although sometimes the way he cooked it would stump me. But eventually, even I could tell that it was salmon, even if it was cooked in butter or if it was cooked in vegetable oil. Then the weather started to get bad. Which wasn't a new thing. Living so close to the water, it's bound to get heavy storms, hurricanes, wind, and even having the waves grow in size is concerning, but luckily we haven't had anything close to a tsunami. But we've had some pretty gruesome waves. Rain never stopped me from going to work, though. Probably helps that I can do it at home as well. With all these storms, if you need to stay inside, well, then get on your computer and work. If the power goes out, you have some printed copies as well. Only a few days is it actually so bad that they'll excuse it. So as I drove through pouring rain to my job, it wasn't anything special. Thunder played music as lightning danced in the sky. It wasn't even until half the day when I realized that Wiley left for work. I don't think I have to explain why working out on the sea while it's storming is a bad idea. But I was so quickly reassured with the thought that he's most likely helping out organizing or pre-cooking the fish in the store. So then I continued on with my day. Luckily, I had brought with me a lunch, so I didn't have to worry about going out in the pouring rain. So I ate my sandwich, went back to work, till the day was done. Then I went back home, and he came back as well. He was soaked and had a bag in his hands, his greatest catch, most likely. I asked him if he actually went to work in this weather, and he said he did. Storm wasn't as bad out on sea, that's what he said. And so we continued on. That day, he gave me salmon. Storms kept getting worse and worse, so much that I had to stay home. I don't normally watch the news, but it had warning and precautions, so I kept at it. Then one day the storm was so bad I couldn't even do my work at home. Just sat and watched the news till the power went out. Wiley came home before the power went out. On the news it was talking about the death of the mayor. He said that the storm must have gone real bad out here on land. And he made his fish, and I couldn't tell what kind it was. There were more storms, and more people kept dying. The power would go on and off, and I couldn't help but worry that one day I'd turn on that TV and find that the ocean had eaten Wiley whole. But it never happened. I'd ask him not to go out the first few times. Of course I did, but he'd shrug it off and say that he had handled bigger storms. Soon the storm stopped, and he continued to fish. We had stopped playing the game. He said he had found a new fishing spot, with new fish and all. That's why I hadn't recognized the taste. Apparently, he said it had bigger fish as well. He had even dedicated a room in the house to hold the big fish in, preserving them. The fish room. And even though the bad weather had stopped, it didn't stop the aftermath. Wiley would get a newspaper saying that the weather had gotten another person in town, and everyone had just found out that they were gone. That continued to happen. Parts of my office building were getting repaired, so I was still at home for most of the time. So I decided I would get the mail. And I saw a letter from Wiley's boss, the one who owns the fish place. It said that Wiley was safe to go to work again. Then there was another, asking where Wiley was. Then another, and another. Apparently, he had never returned to work, nevertheless been working during the storm. That brings the question of where he was. Well, it's not really a question now, is it? It's also not a question why they haven't found those people's bodies. Although I don't think I'm too keen to look in the fish room.